Hello and welcome to Kairos Conversations. Today we are going to be looking at Psalm 23. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me, will pursue me, will hunt me down. How should we translate that? We're going to take a look together. Welcome to Kairos Conversations. I am Ryan Martin, Kairos Classroom's Greek guy, and I'm here with our resident Hebrew enthusiast, Courtney Trotter. No matter your background, if you are someone who wants to dig deeper into the Bible, has questions about Greek or Hebrew grammar, ancient Near Eastern culture, study tools and resources, feel free to join us as we discover the world of the Bible through the original languages. How are you doing today, Courtney?
I'm doing really great. How are you?
Doing good. Excited about this conversation. We're looking at Psalm 23, and particularly at one word in Psalm 23. One word. And this brings us to this topic of studying a word in the Bible. What is a word study, Courtney, and what are they good for?
Yeah, so a word study is where you're going to kind of look up one word in an ancient lexicon or dictionary is what we typically call them in English. But whenever you're talking about ancient languages, we tend to call them lexicons. And so you look up this word in a dictionary and see how it is being used in Hebrew or in Greek and how writers across different genres will use this particular word. And there's a particular way that we should do a word study. One is you look at the word given in its particular context, and you see if it's repeated within that chapter of scripture. Then you look at the wider context and see how that book or how that author, like if it's someone who may have written multiple books in scripture, how they use that word. And then you kind of will zoom out to the broader context and look all across the Old Testament. How is this word used? And then how does that help me interpret or translate this sentence better, or give me a deeper sense? I don't want to say translate better because our translations are already so great, but how does it give me a deeper sense of what is trying to be communicated by the original author? So that's what we tend to do when we look at a word study. And this is probably one of the things that most people do the most. Like if they just want to, dig deep into scripture and do Bible study on their own, they are like looking at particular words and how they're being used, and to see like how does that change the way I read scripture. And so I know, Ryan, you talk about this a lot, and you've got lots of really great explanations to talk about how we do word study well, and kind of maybe some of the pitfalls that we could get into with word study. So how can I do a responsible word study as I'm looking at scripture?
Yeah, we all have our soapbox things, right? Any of my students or people that have worked with me before, they're probably rolling their eyes right now. We have this assumption that words work in certain ways that we would actually never use them this way in English. I don't want to pick, I know this is a very common way of preparing for a sermon or studying. It's just, here's the word I want to know more about. I'm going to go look up a dictionary definition of it. Maybe look in a Bible dictionary or go to Strong's Concordance and look up that word and kind of see the sense of that word, and then kind of bring that back to my passage to shed more light on it. You might be listening and being like, wait, what's wrong with that? I do that every Sunday. Well, here's the deal. Just to give you an example here, let's think about the English word trouble. I use this example a lot. If I say I used to get in a lot of trouble with the law when I was a teenager. Okay, we know what that means. That's a good use of the word trouble. It fits I know. It fits the definition of the trouble you'd find in the dictionary. All right. Now I could also say hey, we went to our Airbnb on vacation, and I had a lot of trouble setting up the Wi-Fi in our cabin. It's also a good and true use of the word trouble. Both of those uses of the word trouble would fit a broad dictionary definition of trouble. But if I were to take the implications of one of those uses and apply it to the other, you would get some weird stuff about me and my cabin at the Airbnb and the police showing up, or I don't know, whatever. We have to be aware not just of what a word can mean, but of what it means in a particular context. So I think we're going to talk a little bit today about how to do this responsibly, but I think maybe a good starting point is just realizing that just because a word does something generally, or just because a word is doing something in one context, we can't just import all of those possible meanings to our particular text. Or maybe even worse, we shouldn't just import the one that is the most convenient for the point we're trying to make into the particular usage.
Right, and that's called like illegitimate totality transfer. I'm really surprised you didn't say that, Ryan, because you love
That's like one
saying
of my
that
favorite,
all the
like,
time.
yeah.
I
I
know.
try to stay away from big, scary words, but illegitimate totality transfer is really fun to say.
It is fun to say. And so that's where, again, you're bringing in a false or like another definition that does work, but it does not work within this context. Or you might be bringing in a whole definition, right? Like, so you might see, just like with trouble, like you've got like a more serious definition of trouble, a less serious definition of trouble, or I could even be playing the game trouble, which is a totally fun definition of trouble. And so you might be saying that everything from the worst to the most fun is like in view here in this text. And that's where you're like, okay, that's too much semantic weight, or semantic just meaning the range of a meaning of a word in this particular context. Especially when we're looking at Hebrew, I always tell my students that vocab is going to be the most exciting thing that we learn as we're walking through our Hebrew, like grammar and stuff like that, because the range of Hebrew words, their semantic range, their range of meaning tends to be so broad. And then you really kind of begin to see the beauty of what the authors are doing and how they are using this word in multiple different ways in a context. But we just need to be really smart about that. And a lot of those words give us really beautiful, what I like to call word pictures, right? That paints a picture in your mind, because they're very vivid words of what this would look like. And that's what we're going to see here in Psalm 23 today, is this beautiful word picture as it relates to God's character. And it gets me excited whenever I'm able to see a word picture like that. But we just need to make sure we're doing it smartly as we approach our Hebrew Bible.
Exactly. Yeah. So let's see this in practice. What is the word that we're looking at in Psalm 23? Like, why does this conversation of word study? What is it that we're looking at here?
Yeah, so I chose Psalm 23 for this discussion today because it is just such a beloved psalm by so many people. And if we can give them just a little bit of like a step closer into the Hebrew writer's perspective of this, I think at least it should get them excited even more for their favorite psalm, right? So let's look at some of the different ways that this is translated in modern English translations, right? So I start out with both basically the KJV and the ESV having the same exact translation. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life is the rest of that line. In the NASB, it says, surely goodness and faithfulness will follow me. In the NIV, surely your goodness and love will follow me. But then we get to the CSB and the NLT here, and we have a slightly different word. And this is one where people who like to compare translations, like this is where maybe some of the different definitions in Hebrew actually get brought out. If you really like comparing translations, this is one of those. The CSB says, only goodness and faithful love will pursue me. And the NLT, surely your goodness and unfailing love will pursue me. So why did they translate it as pursue? Like that's going to be our question. And also, what about this word for faithfulness or steadfast love? So just quickly, we're not going to look at this one kind of in our dictionary, but that is the Hebrew word hesed. And that hesed, and throughout your ESV and many other translations, is steadfast love, although they translate it as mercy in Psalm 23. And the reason why is because our KJV was our first translation in English, and sometimes the way that we've memorized it, plus our grandparents have memorized it, it just makes it hard to change the translation from what people would expect.
It's already on a plaque on grandma's wall. We can't mess with that.
Yeah, it's embroidered on a pillow. It's on a plaque, it's on somebody's headstone for sure. And so these are not to be, made light of in any way, but that just means that as translators who are coming to the text, it's just going to be hard to change. So usually that word mercy throughout the ESV is translated as steadfast love. And to kind of like your astute readers of scripture, if you hear the word hesed or steadfast love, you'll immediately be thinking of the context in Exodus 34, 5 and 6, where God reveals his character to Moses at the top of Mount Sinai. And he says that he's a God of mercy and steadfast love who has love for thousands of generations. So whenever we hear that word hesed, we should be thinking about our Exodus 34 kind of moment. But that's one word that you see has different variations of translation there. But then also we saw the difference between follow and pursue, and that's the word we're going to look at today. So let's look at it, what it looks like in Hebrew. We'll look at it in Hebrew. I have surely goodness, and then there's that hesed, steadfast love. And then I have the verb, will pursue me all the days of my life. And so that verb, I highlighted those three letters in the middle of that verb because that's our main verb. The rest of it's just a conjugation like we would have in English, like the will. And that verb is radaf in Hebrew. And so I pulled that down into bigger text for you to be able to see it. That's what it looks like in Hebrew, and it's radaf. All right, so let's just see, should it be pursue? Should it be follow? That's probably what you're wondering.
Yeah, and that's what I'm wondering. We just saw a whole bunch of different English translations of these. Like, which one is best? Which one do you like best?
Yeah, so I personally, and this is not just like a personal opinion here, I like the word pursue. And there's lots of reasons for that, but I've got lots of good like commentaries here sitting around me, and every single commentary I have on the Psalm, including like Robert Alter's translation on the Psalms, which he's a Jewish scholar, but has a really great kind of literal translation that's trying to get at the poetic meaning of the Psalms and the whole Hebrew Bible. They all translate it as pursue instead of follow. And again, I think this is one of those scenarios where our KJV gave us the word follow, and it's just hard to change it to pursue when everybody's got it memorized like that. But there's reasons why I think it's pursue. We'll look at the dictionary here in a second. And check that out.
Can you kind of take us through, like, let's say that we're doing this, we're looking at a text, maybe a different one. How can we walk down these steps and kind of use a dictionary, use resources responsibly? What can we do when we want to know more about a particular word?
Yeah. So what's exciting is that like we have all of these free resources available to us just on the internet. And so you do not have to like have a background in Hebrew at all, but you can go and use these free resources and they will kind of give you insight into the full meaning and semantic range, like I said, the full meaning of these words. And so one of those I like to use a lot is called Bible Hub. And so if you just, type into your search engine the verse you want to look at, so Psalm 23:6, and then the word interlinear, you'll pull up a screen that looks like this. And so you'll have the Hebrew text there, and then you'll have an English translation underneath, along with all of the different kind of parts of speech underneath that English translation. But all the way at the top, you can see that mouse kind of clicking on a number. That mouse is clicking on a number that's called the Strong's number, which will take us to a dictionary. All right, so whenever I pull up my Strong's Concordance, you can see I have highlighted there the verb radaf, and then I get a really quick translation to pursue, chase, or persecute. Pursue, chase, or persecute. Now, this is a quick definition. All right, so I would say, especially when you're looking at Hebrew, I would not use this quick definition to do my deep word study. And the reason why is this, is that in Hebrew, there are different stems or patterns for verbs. And if you change the stem, you change the meaning of a verb. And so you need to be sure that like your stem is translated that way. And you're like, oh my gosh, Courtney, I've never taken Hebrew. I don't know anything about verbs. I don't know anything about stems. What should I do? All right, this is what you do. Just hit Control F and type in Psalm 23:6 into Control F, and this is what will show up. It will take me to the BDB, which is further down if you were scrolling down. But if you look at the BDB, you're just looking at it right there. You're like, wow, there's a whole bunch of Hebrew characters. Like, I'm getting lost in it. So that's why I say do Control F. And it takes me to the cow stem, which is up on the top left. And it tells me, hey, in the cow stem, this is translated as pursue or chase or hunt, as you see under the like D there at the top. D is chase or hunt. And so, but as I get all the way down to G, I have pursue or dog. Like that's not a common English word today. BDB is kind of old, so that's the reason why they do that. But you can see right there, there's my Psalm 23:6 that says that this is how this should be translated in this context.
This is so helpful and so good to have a pattern from a free resource to say like, hey, I can find the verse or the passage that I want, and using the interlinear, I can find that word and click on it, but not just stop at that general definition that may or may not, any part of that may or may not apply to my text that I'm actually looking at. And just by, finding in my browser, Control F is the shortcut for that, I can find not just the general definition of that word, but the way that some really smart scholars have understood that verb or that word to be functioning in that individual context. I mean, behind this is the idea that the same word is going to function differently in different ways. And this is even before we get to the idea of a stem in Hebrew. Now, the Hebrew stem makes this an even more important deal because words can have vastly different meanings. But still, like the more we zoom into a particular word's usage in a particular context, the more confident we can be in, these really good scholars giving us good information. But what does this mean? Let's say this is pursue. Why do you like this better than follow? And how does that change the way that we read and interpret the psalm?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of really good reasons why we should translate this as pursue. Aside from the fact that, we could click on our dictionary and it shows us right there. And that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, context, 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 our favorite thing, right? And so right there in the preceding verse, we have David's enemies being mentioned, that God has prepared a table in the presence of his enemies, right? So what do your enemies normally do?
They pursue you.
They pursue you. They chase you. They persecute you, right? They do all of that. They're trying to get you. And so what David is saying is that, hey, God actually is preparing a banquet for me where I can rest in the presence of my enemies. So even if it may look like they're coming after me and they want to kill me, I actually have rest because God is doing something. I actually have rest from my enemies. But then on the flip side of that, what or who is actually pursuing David? Right, so you have kind of this enemy language. This is the thing that enemies normally do. They normally chase, they normally pursue. But instead of the enemies, here we have God's good, faithful, steadfast love pursuing David. And so it just gives you this beautiful picture that while our lives might look chaotic, it might look like, there's victory of the powers of evil in our lives, right? That actually God's victory still stands and that we can be confident that he is pursuing us even at our lowest moment. Whenever we hear the word follow in English, we just think of a passive kind of, like my dog following me.
I don't
right?
think
just
of enemies with that. Yeah.
You don't think of enemies and you don't think of chasing, right? You just think of like la-di-da-di-da, la-di-da-di-da. But this is a much more active God, a much more active pursuit by him. So I think that, when we just click on that definition and we see that, okay, I could see in the BDB, it says it translated as pursue. I can see in my commentaries that they all translated as pursue, just in their own translation. But even more so, that context shows me that word picture, like I was saying, that word picture that God's goodness and his mercy, his steadfast love is actually the one that's chasing me. It's actually the one pursuing me.
That makes sense to me. I'm convinced. The enemy connection makes so much sense. It's like, enemies pursue you, right? Well, in this picture that the psalm that David's giving us it's God's love. It's God's hesed that is pursuing us. Fascinating and really helpful and really, I think, devotionally meaningful discussion. Thank you, Courtney. Is there anything else you want to add to this discussion before we wrap up?
Yeah, no, I just think this is exactly the kind of stuff that people want to do with word studies. And this is the way that we know we can be confident in our kind of new insights from looking up a word. Yeah, I think this was great.
Awesome. Well, thank you for participating in this conversation with us. Do all the YouTube stuff. Like, subscribe, tell your friends about these videos. We want to take these big questions and big conversations happening in the Theological Academy and from the perspective of the original languages, bring them to you and invite you into them. We think these things matter. Otherwise, we wouldn't be wasting time talking about them. So thanks for watching. Stay tuned and we will see you next time.